Today we are going to be making a value scale. Okay, we want to make sure that we are looking at the rubric on Canvas to help you make this value scale, to make sure that you have all of the things necessary for it. Okay, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a 1/2 inch border around the edge of our paper here. Okay, so whenever you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're using the 0 part of your ruler, not the very edge, because that means that this is a little bit bigger than 1 inch. Okay, so I'm going to line this up here with my line here with the edge, and I'm going to make a little dash at the halfway point, just like that. Okay, I'm going to move my paper up here and do the same thing again, make a small dash at the halfway point. Okay, and now I'm going to line these up. And I like to line up my ruler with the edge of my paper to make sure it's totally straight. Okay, and then I'm going to lightly, very lightly, draw a line across here. So I have my first border. You want to make sure this is nice and light because you will actually be erasing this later. You don't need this for the whole thing. It just helps you make sure that you have that 1/2 inch going around there. Okay, now I'm going to do the same thing for all of the sides. So I'm going to make my 1/2 inch here, okay, my 1/2 inch here. Okay, and something to keep in mind while you're using this, if you're using a ruler and you think, man, I can't even draw a straight line, even if I'm using a ruler, okay, the chances are is because you're not having equal balance between your hands. Okay, so we have our dominant hand, which for me is my right hand, and then we have our non-dominant hand, which is my left hand. And my left hand is kind of like a dead fish, and my dominant hand is kind of like, I don't know, it has like the power of Thanos in it. Okay, it's super strong. And so what I want to do is I want to equalize these so that I don't mess up using my ruler and I don't press too hard on my paper. So I have my little dots here. Okay, I'm going to line up the edge of my ruler with the edge of my paper. I'm going to line up my dots here. Okay, now one of the things that you want to keep in mind while you're doing this is that, let's see, okay, one of the first things you want to do is to make sure that your hand, your thumb, and your fingers up here are spaced out, okay, and you're pressing nice and hard into your ruler, into your paper. Okay, with your with your dominant hand, your writing hand, you're going to hold your pencil towards the end, not the absolute end like this, but kind of towards the end, just like this. Okay, and I'm going to softly drag the lead. I'm just going so soft across my paper, and when I move it, then I have this nice light line. Okay, so if you softly drag it across, right, I'm not holding it down here and pressing down super hard. I'm just softly dragging it, and then I get a nice soft line. Okay, so I'm going to finish that up on my other sides here. Okay, so I have my border completed. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in 1 by 1 inch squares. Now I want my squares to be perfectly square, and I want them to be within this. So I don't want them to be out here too much. Okay, they can be right next to your line here, but we don't want them to overlap. Okay, so I'm going to make 1 inch by 1 inch boxes, and I think I'm going to kind of start them here. All right, so let's see. So 7 1 inch by 1 inch boxes. So here's 1 inch. I'm going to leave a little space. Make 1 inch right here, leave a space. Okay, and then for me, I'm just counting fourths, right? So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, because these are quarters. right? So that's 1/2 inch, right? So this next one is going to start at 3/4 inch here. And so I'm making my little dashes. You can do this however makes the most sense to you. But I want to make sure that I have spaces between all of my boxes. Super important to make sure I have those spaces in there because that is 6 points of your grade according to the rubric. Did I goof? I think I messed up. Let's see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, cool. I'm going to erase this little dash right here. So I have little 7 spots here. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and make a line for 1 inch. And again, I'm making sure that this line, the 0 line, goes against my first line here, so I know that it's definitely 1 inch. I'm going to connect these. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and start making my lines here. So I'm lining this one up here. I'm going to draw a soft line. Okay. Let's see. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this will be 6. And then, oh, I don't know if I measured this one out quite right. Okay, so now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 boxes. I'm good to go. Now, if you would like to do more than 7 boxes, you're welcome to do that. Some people are very specific and they want to have 8 boxes because they really like even numbers. And if that's the case for you, that's fine. You need at least, goodness, at least 7 boxes. So I have 7 boxes here. And I'm going to easily, softly erase the lines that I no longer need to kind of separate those out. All right. Okay, now the next thing that I want to do is I want to add in my 1 by 7 inch rectangle. And I'm going to do this towards the bottom down here. Okay, and so I'm going to do the same thing that I did to start off these boxes. I'm going to measure from my border the 1 inch point here. Okay, and I'm going to do another measurement down here for 1 inch. Okay, and then I'm going to decide where I want my 7 inch rectangle to go. And I think that this looks good right here. So I'm going to kind of mark the starting and ending point. All right, so it's going to go right about here, right about there. Okay, so from here I can draw straight up. And then from here, going straight up. And then I'm going to, here we go. Okay, so now I have my 1 inch by 7 inch box. Okay, now I want to go ahead and double check, make sure I got my measuring right here. Oop, I'm a little bit off here. Let me see if I have this one. Okay, so that one looks pretty good. Let me try this again. So if I'm remeasuring, it's gonna be just a teeny tiny bit off. Okay, and so from this point, I'm gonna line this up. And I think it's because I didn't use the edge of my paper on this one. So I got a little bit of an angle. There we go. Okay, now I'm gonna erase this double line here. You guys can kind of see that top one is the one that I made a little too high. Okay, now I'm going to add in my two definitions before I start shading. Okay, my first definition is value. Okay, and I want to make sure I'm keeping it within my borders here, so I don't want to go all the way over here. Okay, value is the lightness or darkness of a color. Okay. Gradation is the smooth transition between two values. Okay, so the lightness or darkness of a color is what value is, and then gradation is the smooth transition between two values. Okay, now when we're working on this, we want to make sure that we are shading using a wooden pencil. So make sure that you're using a wooden pencil instead of a mechanical pencil. Okay, with a wooden pencil, you can use the side of the lead, okay, as opposed to a mechanical pencil where there's not really a good side of the lead. It's not as easy to work with. Okay, so whenever I'm shading, I want to hold my pencil in a kind of a weird way. I don't want to hold it like this normally, and I don't want to do this out here. Some people like to do that. Okay, whenever I'm first starting, I like to take my writing hand, place my pencil across the knuckles here on the inside, okay, so kind of the underside of your knuckles, and then I grab it like this, and I tilt it so that my pointer finger goes here, and then whenever I flip it over, my hands are touching the table. So I'm going to move these out of the way. So whenever I'm shading, it looks like this. So here's the underside, and then here's the side that you'll see. Okay, this allows me to have better control over my shading pressure. Okay, so I can get really, really light and really nice medium tones, and then the really dark ones as well. Okay, so whenever I start shading, I usually like to start with kind of a middle one just because I never know how hard I'm going to start off with. Okay, so this one I'm going to go ahead and shade in. When you're shading, layers are your friend. Okay, so you want to make sure that you are building these up softly and easily and nice and evenly as well. Okay, and we want to make sure that we don't really have a texture to this. We want it to be pretty smooth. We don't want it to seem very liney, right? We don't want to see the direction in which we shade it in. We want it to be more of a solid color. Okay, so I'm shading in here, and whenever I shade, I kind of use, instead of just going back and forth, I kind of use like a rounded shape, almost like I'm drawing like a zero over and over again. Right, and you want to be careful not to get too far out of those lines because that will affect your measurements later on. Okay, now I have this, but I have a couple of spots that are a little bit darker. So I'm going to add another layer to this. I'm going to go in different directions here to kind of smooth it out just a little bit. I'm going back and forth here, and I'm smoothing this out. A really important thing to keep in mind while you are shading is that we do not want to, there we go. We do not want to do any finger blending. Whenever you are finger blending, you're taking the sebaceous oils in your skin and you're grinding them into your paper, and it turns your paper kind of a weird oily look to it, kind of gets like a brownish tint sometimes. And then on top of that, your picture doesn't have any depth because instead of having multiple layers of shading, you have like half a layer of shading. Okay, so it doesn't give you that nice depth. Okay, so I have my middle one here. I'm feeling pretty good about this. I might change this a little bit whenever I do these two here. I might lighten it up a little bit or I might darken it depending upon how my first and second values go. So this one I'm going to go even lighter. Okay, and it's easier to work lighter once you know what your kind of base pressure is, right? Because everybody's a little bit different. Some people are more heavy-handed than others. Okay, so I'm adding this in here. Okay, I'm going to even out the shading. Don't be afraid to get right up next to your line without going over. If you don't get up right next to your line, you don't have a very well-defined square. It just kind of looks like a weird blur. Okay, and I'm actually going to make this a tiny bit darker, I think, here. Just a little bit.